Hey everyone, Eric Stakelbeck here. Today on the newscast, an exclusive interview with the international spokesman of the Israel Defense Forces, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Get the inside story on how the IDF is fighting back against the Iranian regime and its proxies. That's coming up. Hey folks, Eric Stakelbeck here, and we are going to get right into it today. We've been telling you about the Iranian regime and its proxies, in particular Hezbollah, and how they continue to plot evil as the world is locked down by this coronavirus crisis. Well, we've got a very special guest today who's going to break it all down for us. The international spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Now, we're going to go to the interview with Jonathan in a second. Real quick, I encourage you to look back at our past 3 newscasts here on YouTube. That's April 14th, 16th, and 19th. You can find them here in our archives. We give you a lot of background information on what we're going to be talking about today with Jonathan, namely the Iranian regime and Hezbollah and those Shia militias and what they are doing to Israel's north, the severe threat they pose not only to Israel, but to the entire free world. So check that out and be sure to subscribe and click the notification button while you are there. So let's get into it with the international spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Take a look. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us as always here on the Watchman Show. We hope you are safe and sound in Israel right now.
Thank you, I am, and it's always a pleasure to be with you, Eric.
Yeah, great to be with you, Jonathan. Hey, you are always a very busy man, but with this COVID-19 crisis, a pretty unprecedented global pandemic, tell us how it has maybe in some ways changed the IDF's mission. You're doing a lot of humanitarian work right now, I'd imagine. How has the IDF had to adjust to battling the coronavirus?
Our priorities still put, and I think that they will put, protecting the borders of Israel at number 1, but at a number 2, we have been busy all around the country in supporting the civilian population and in supporting civilian efforts to combat the spread of the virus and the effects of the disease inside Israel. It is definitely different missions. The IDF really has we usually speak about a full spectrum of operations that we have to be ready to deal with. Iranian missile threats, Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, and Islamic Jihad and Islamic State looming about in different areas, and a few other enemies. And that's our bread and butter. That's what we're usually ready to deal with. And COVID-19 and pandemics are not. So we've been adjusting, but keeping clear, we're maintaining a clear aim on number 1 mission, that is to continue to defend the state, because no other organization will be doing that.
Yeah, Jonathan, I want to ask you in a minute about those bad guys, those bad actors like the Iranian regime that are still operating even during this global pandemic. But hey, Israel is receiving such high marks, and deservedly so, for its handling of COVID-19. Tell us how the IDF was in some ways uniquely prepared to deal with this pandemic.
Well, I think that much goes down to our organizational character and the fact that, like many other militaries around the world, like the U.S. Armed Forces, we look to contribute and we start looking for missions even before we are given tasks. And we understood that there's a situation here that the state of Israel needs every able organization capable of alleviating and helping. And we see ourselves definitely as the most capable organization in Israel to deal with almost every situation. So under the guidance of the Israeli government and as per the scientific medical instructions by the Ministry of Health, we've been working together. The part of the IDF that has been leading efforts for most of the things that we've been doing is our Home Front Command, which is kind of a special thing that it should be quite special in Israel. This is a part, it's like a territorial command, like we have the Northern Command, the Southern Command, and the Central Command that are all combat commands. And we have our Home Front Command, which is in charge of interacting between the IDF and the civilian population in Israel. Usually in times of war, when there's rockets raining down on the Israeli population, or for instance, in a scenario of earthquakes, but now also when we're dealing about a pandemic. So that part of the IDF has been leading all of the medical, logistic, and other types of effort that the IDF has been involved in and still is, as we speak, in support of government objectives.
Yeah, Jonathan, I guess you could say the IDF has pretty much seen it all over the years. So again, uniquely prepared to tackle this pandemic. But tell us, look, you mentioned the Iranian regime and its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and all the rest. How difficult is it right now to juggle battling this major, unprecedented global pandemic with also preparing for Israel's enemies, which unfortunately do not rest even during a time like this?
No, they definitely are not resting. And just over these last 3-4 weeks, we've had several attempts of infiltration attempts from the Gaza Strip into Israel, all of them successfully thwarted by the IDF. We have had one attempt by Hezbollah in Lebanon, who tried to fly over an intelligence gathering drone, or a makeshift UAV that they scrambled together. We were able to intercept that as well. And just last week, we saw unusual activity by the Syrian army working together with Hezbollah and Iranian forces on the Syrian Golan Heights. So there's examples from 3 main theaters of operations, Lebanon, the Golan Heights, and Gaza, to indicate that indeed activity does not pause, and nobody's waiting for us to get over the corona situation in Israel and then get back to defending. It has to be done simultaneously, and that's how it is done. I'll tell you that one of the first things we did in the IDF to make sure that our combat capability is protected, what we did was to encapsulate the IDF and immediately send almost all of our combat soldiers to their units, to the front, so that we would minimize the risk of contamination between civilians in Israel and combat soldiers in their units. So we sent all of the combat soldiers to the front, and they've been staying there now on their bases for around 5 weeks. Why? Because we didn't want to have a turnover of personnel, soldiers coming back home, getting infected, and then going back to their units, and then risking an infection of units. So we kept the soldiers at base, including, unfortunately, also over the very important Jewish holiday of Passover, which wasn't convenient for everybody. But all in all, I think our soldiers and officers, they understand that this is a necessity. And that's just one example of the steps that we've taken to make sure that we continue to conduct our missions against whatever threat it is that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I guess this was a Passover unlike any in over 3,000 years, I guess you would say, Jonathan, this past Passover.
You can say that. Yeah.
Hey, you know, the Iranian regime itself and Iran as a nation, they've been hit pretty hard by this coronavirus. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there's any signs that they have chosen a course correction, maybe to focus on their own citizens and helping people get better and fighting this virus. It seems like they are still every bit as much committed to terror and expansionism in the region. Have you seen any change in their calculation in the past several weeks since this COVID-19 epidemic began?
Yeah, you know, it's Eric, it's very unfortunate. Any human suffering, even if it is in Iran, you know, the Iranian people, we don't have a beef with the Iranian people, and we see lots of suffering in Iran, and we see how Iranian so-called advisors and basically parts of the Quds Force have actually been part of spreading the disease and the virus to different parts of the Middle East. We saw that very early on, very unfortunate. And I think you're very correct in what you're saying, that we're not seeing a shift so far in priorities, in budgeting, and measures taken by the extremist Iranian regime with regards to, instead of continuing expansionism and spreading terror throughout the Middle East, what we have seen, and we've actually gone on record saying, is that we've seen a temporary decline in the amount and the intensity of the activity conducted by the different terror organizations and the different Iranian proxies around us. Now, the fact that we've seen that and the fact that we continue to monitor that does not, of course, lead to any complacency in the IDF. And I can assure you and the viewers that we are vigilant as ever along our borders. But yes, we should say that there's been a drop of sorts in the activity. One could assess and assume that it's related to the outbreak of the COVID-19 disease in Iran and amongst its proxy organizations. But we shouldn't, of course, take any of that for as an indication of a lower threat against our civilians.
One of the other troubling aspects of Iran's behavior, even during this epidemic, is they continue to attempt to ship these precision-guided munitions into the hands of Hezbollah and other terror groups. Jonathan, can you tell us why those precision-guided munitions, particularly in the hands of the likes of Hezbollah, would be a very dangerous game changer in the region?
Well, without getting too much into, heavy military detail, but Hezbollah has 130,000 rockets. Now, all of those rockets are hidden behind Lebanese civilians. They're inside Lebanese homes, and they're behind schools, hospitals, mosques, and embedded in the civilian Lebanese population. Hezbollah has done that so that they'll be able to fire at our civilians and then use Lebanese civilians as human shields. PGMs, precision-guided missiles, are kind of advanced rockets, and what Hezbollah is trying to do is to develop an arsenal of these missiles that are not only statistical weapons, whereby you fire them in a general location, and if you're lucky, it hits. If you're not lucky, it misses by a few hundred yards or more. PGMs are accurate, and they can hit within a distance of 50 yards. So this is a game changer for Hezbollah. They're aiming to be the first terrorist organization in the world to obtain those kind of capabilities. And they're very clear what they want to achieve with these missiles. They want to fire them at the most sensitive national infrastructure, civilian national infrastructure in Israel, in order to cause as many casualties as possible. That's why the IDF and the State of Israel has been very clear about the fact that this is something that we are not going to allow Hezbollah to obtain. Now, your viewers, I'm sure, are hearing different reports of events transpiring in the Middle East or along our borders, some of them further away and some of them closer to our borders. And our general policy is that we don't speak about reports that come from foreign media. I can say that we are taking an active stance, and we will continue to do so, in negating Hezbollah from obtaining these kind of capabilities, and we will also take a continued active stance against Iranian entrenchment in Syria.
Well, as an American, Jonathan, I want to thank you for that, because we realize that Israel is the first line of defense against these forces, which, I'm talking about the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, are also viciously anti-American. So we're very thankful that Israel's standing on the front lines, really, for the entire free world. Thanks again to Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus for joining us. Folks, you can follow Jonathan on Twitter at LTC Jonathan, and you can also follow the Israel Defense Forces at IDF to get all the latest updates on what is happening in the Middle East and how it affects you, no matter where you live. Speaking of which, the Iranian regime has been making noise over the past few days. We have reports that they are readying a fleet of combat-ready drones that could potentially reach Israel. That's number one. Number two, we had an incident in the Persian Gulf, reportedly, over the past few days of Iran harassing U.S. ships in the Gulf. So the powder keg continues, and the Iranian regime continues to push the envelope. As Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus told us today, coronavirus may have slowed the regime down just a bit, a tiny bit, but their end game, their ideology, their goals remain exactly the same. And once this pandemic passes, and it will pass, the day of reckoning will come, and the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, these radical Shia militias in Iraq, Syria, and beyond, Israel and the West are going to have to face them, and it's going to be a very, very serious thing. So stay tuned here for all the latest updates. Be sure to subscribe and give us a big thumbs up, like what we are doing here on YouTube, and click the notification button, because every time a new newscast is posted, you will get the alert. Also, we are posting clips frequently on the regular from the Watchman TV show, which you can see every Friday. Right now, a special time for the next few weeks, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, every Friday on TBN. That's here in America. I know we have viewers from around the world, but here in the States, TBN, 4:30 p.m. Eastern on Fridays, and Sunday nights on the Fox Business Network at 12:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So be sure to check it out. Be sure to subscribe here on YouTube and join our movement at Christians United for Israel. That's CUFI.org. Hey, the world's largest pro-Israel organization, over 8 million members, and growing every day for such a time as this. Thanks so much for joining us today on the newscast. Thanks again to Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus and the IDF. Until next time, God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace.